Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime Blacklist Archive. I know it's been a minute since we last sat down together for one of these deep dives, and I really appreciate every single one of you who's been keeping an eye on this case while the channel was quiet. You've probably been watching every angle, every update, every little detail that's trickled out over the past 100 days. But I didn't want to come back with just another recap video or a timeline you've already heard a dozen times. I was waiting for that one moment. The moment when enough new pieces had arrived that the picture they formed together is impossible to look away from. This week, that moment arrived, and it arrived from multiple directions at once. A claim surfaced that, if it checks out, could genuinely shift the entire landscape of the Nancy Guthrie disappearance. According to a report from Hiden Times, Annie Guthrie reportedly asked her mother Nancy for a loan in the days or weeks right before Nancy vanished from her home in Catalina Foothills on February 1st. And Nancy reportedly said no. Right off the bat, I want to be crystal clear. This has not been confirmed by law enforcement, and the family has not publicly addressed it or denied it. But it landed squarely in the middle of a case where financial questions around Annie and her husband Tommaso Cioni have been stacking up for months. Property values, legal paperwork, activity at the house, you name it. Suddenly those pieces had a potential starting point they didn't have before. And then, on top of that, the FBI director went on a national podcast and said something that, if you've been following this series, is going to land very differently than it would for someone hearing about this case for the first time. He said the FBI was kept out of this investigation for 4 full days. 4 days, in a case where the first 48 hours are considered the most critical window in any disappearance, and that's not all he said, but we'll get there. In this video, we're going to follow the money. Not wild speculation, not rumors, but the documented financial trail that runs through public records, legal instruments, law enforcement actions, contradictory statements made by investigators on camera, and that one reported conversation between a mother and her daughter. For 3 long months, we've walked through how Nancy was taken, the apparent surveillance on multiple weekends, the cameras that went dark, the flower pots carefully moved in the darkness by someone who clearly knew that patio, the security gate that doesn't open from the outside, the medication left sitting on the counter, and those ransom notes that contain details only someone inside the scene would know. Every earlier video tackled a piece of the how, but the why, the reason someone would plan and execute something this elaborate against an 84-year-old woman while she slept, that piece has stayed just out of reach until now. So let's walk through the financial picture together, sticking only to what's documented and reported. When you line these details up in order, they stop feeling random and start forming a direction. Nancy's home in the Catalina Foothills is valued at roughly $1 million according to public records. It's in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the Tucson area, and she had lived there for decades. Annie and Tommaso's place is only about 4 miles away, valued at around $650,000. On its own, that $350,000 gap doesn't mean anything unusual. Parents often have more than their grown children, and that's completely normal. But when you're trying to understand why someone would target Nancy specifically, why this woman, why this house, and why with this level of planning, the value of what she owned starts to feel relevant. In cases involving elderly people and someone from their inner circle, the most common motive investigators look at isn't rage or revenge. It's access to assets that become available once the owner is no longer there. That's just a documented pattern in true crime, not an accusation in this case. Then there's the power of attorney. An unverified document that circulated online shows that back in May 2025, 8 full months before Nancy disappeared, Tommaso signed a durable power of attorney naming Annie as his agent for financial and property matters. People with legal backgrounds have looked at it publicly and said this is pretty standard paperwork, the kind that gets signed during a mortgage refinance or a property transfer. One comment I saw called it routine for a loan closing and nothing more. And maybe that's exactly what it was, but the timing puts it right in the sequence we're looking at. May 2025, power of attorney signed. Sometime before January 31st, the reported request for a loan that was turned down. January 31st, Nancy has dinner at Annie and Tommaso's house. Tommaso drives her home. February 1st, Nancy is gone. You can look at any single item in that sequence and call it coincidence, but when you see the whole line, it has a direction, and that direction is financial. Now let's talk about what's been happening at Nancy's house itself, because the activity there has raised even more questions that the family hasn't answered publicly. Photographs have surfaced in recent weeks showing people loading items into vehicles at the property. Annie's Honda CR-V was visible in some of those images. Boxes were being carried out. Keep in mind, Nancy has not been declared deceased. There is no death certificate. No probate has started. No court has authorized anyone to remove personal property from the home of a woman whose disappearance is still an active criminal investigation. A true crime reporter on the ground, JLR Investigates, posted something that spread quickly. Someone plans to move into Nancy Guthrie's home. The reply that got the most attention was simple: someone who cannot pay their own property taxes. There is no official confirmation that Annie and Tommaso intend to move in. But between the boxes leaving, the repeated presence of Annie's vehicle, and the fact that Tommaso was seen moving through the house and garage with visible familiarity on the same day those ransom notes hit TMZ, the public has started connecting its own dots. The picture those dots form is a family preparing to assume control of a property that does not legally belong to them yet, because its owner has not been declared dead. Now, and I want to pause here because this is the part that the last few weeks have genuinely complicated, the Sheriff's Department has officially cleared Annie and Tommaso as suspects. Sheriff Chris Nanos said it directly in a statement. The Guthrie family, to include all siblings and spouses, has been cleared as possible suspects in this case. To suggest otherwise is not only wrong, it is cruel. Reporter Brian Entin, who has been on the ground for News Nation since day one, told Parade he has never seen a single piece of evidence pointing toward the family. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer said publicly, "Annie Guthrie is a woman who works hard. No signs of money problems." And Coffindaffer added something that doesn't get quoted enough. Why would Tommaso Cioni, who was her caretaker and saw her regularly, they had Sunday dinners together, be involved? There's nothing for them to gain. I'm not accusing Annie Guthrie or Tommaso Cioni of anything. I have never made that accusation on this channel, and I'm not making it now. What I'm doing is following the documented financial thread and noting where it leads, because that thread exists independently of whether any specific person is responsible for following it. And right now, that thread still has questions attached to it that nobody has answered publicly. Let's connect that financial thread to something I've covered in earlier videos, but never from quite this angle: Nancy's vulnerability. I've talked before about all the basic protections that were missing from her life in those final weeks. The dog that had passed away, the camera system that wasn't recording, the hearing aids that came out every single night, the medication left on the counter, no caretaker, no alarm, no medical alert bracelet. What I haven't said until now is that every single one of those safeguards costs money to put in place. A camera subscription is about $15 a month. A medical alert pendant is less than $1 a day. An overnight caregiver through a home health agency in Tucson runs a few $100s a week. These aren't luxury expenses. They're the kind of routine precautions that families with elderly parents living alone usually put in place with a single phone call and a credit card. The Guthrie family had the resources. Savannah is one of the highest-paid broadcast journalists in the country, and the combined income across the three siblings would easily cover every one of those basics. Yet none of it was done. Nancy was left in a $1 million home with no active security, no monitoring, no overnight help, and no easy way to call for assistance once her hearing aids were out and she was completely deaf to the world around her. Now, two FBI profilers who appeared in a national special on the CW in May offered a reading of that vulnerability that I think deserves equal time here. Jim Clemente and Jim Fitzgerald both concluded that the abduction of Nancy Guthrie is likely connected to her daughter Savannah's celebrity, not to any financial motive within the family. Their theory: someone who couldn't access the television personality directly turned their attention to her mother instead. Fitzgerald said the crime appears driven by psychological need rather than financial gain. And when you hear that theory, the absence of protection around Nancy looks completely different. It looks like a family that never imagined Savannah's public reach could translate into a physical threat to the mother living alone in Arizona. It looks like a tragedy of a different kind, but equally devastating. Savannah said something in April that stays with me. Speaking to the Today Show in tears, she said, "It's too much to bear to think that I brought this to her bedside, that it's because of me. And I just want to say, I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry." That was not performance. That was guilt. The kind that comes from a very specific fear about where a trail might lead. So we have two readings of the same vulnerability. One that points inward, the financial thread, the absences that someone close to Nancy would have known about and could have exploited. And one that points outward, an obsessed stranger who studied this woman for weeks because she was the closest reachable thing to the woman he couldn't touch. Both are supported by evidence in the public record. Neither has been ruled out, and both of them need to be held at the same time because that's what intellectual honesty requires when you're dealing with a case that hasn't been solved. What both theories agree on, completely, is this: whoever took Nancy knew her routines in extraordinary detail. The surveillance images that investigators later recovered from neighbor cameras tell us that much. Investigators requested footage from January 11th, 3 weeks before the disappearance, between 9 p.m. and midnight, and from January 31st itself, between 9:30 a.m. and 11 a.m. Someone was watching that house. Someone knew when she would arrive home, how the garage worked, where the cameras were positioned, how to move a potted plant in the dark to block a camera's field of view. Someone had spent time learning the layout of that patio in a way that only patience and repetition produces. That level of knowledge is consistent with someone from inside Nancy's circle, but it is also consistent with someone who had nothing but time and obsession and a reason to study her from a distance. Now let's walk through the night of January 31st one more time, but this time through the lens of money and access rather than just timelines and cameras. At 5:32 p.m., Nancy requested an Uber from her house. The driver picked her up, took her to Annie and Tommaso's for dinner and games. That ride is fully documented, timestamps, in-car footage, a driver who cooperated completely with the FBI. Everything about the trip to their house is on the record. The trip home is not. Nancy didn't call another Uber. Tommaso was behind the wheel. He decided when they left. He chose the route. He determined the exact moment Nancy reached her front door, and his account of walking her inside and watching the garage close behind her stands completely alone. No camera caught the arrival. No neighbor saw it. No app logged a timestamp. If the reported loan refusal is accurate, then that evening carries extra weight. It means the last person Nancy had dinner with was the daughter she had reportedly turned down for money. It means the last person to drive her home was the husband of the daughter she turned down, and it means the 14 hours that followed, from roughly 9:50 p.m. until noon the next day, happened after that financial request was denied. 14 hours is an extraordinary gap for an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker who needed medication at 10 p.m. that the sheriff said could be fatal if skipped. She was about to remove her hearing aids and become completely deaf to the world. She was alone in a house with no active cameras, no alarm, no medical alert, and no caretaker. The people who drove her home knew all of that. Yet from the moment the garage door closed until a friend called the next morning because Nancy never showed up for church, there was zero contact, no call, no text, no quick 4-mile drive to check on her. In families where an aging parent lives alone, the goodnight call is usually automatic. The morning check-in is routine. A 3-second text that says, "Home safe, love you," costs nothing and shows care. That ritual was missing on January 31st. And its absence created the exact operational window that whoever took Nancy needed. No interruption, no unexpected visit, no phone call that might have been answered by anyone else. Just a clean 14-hour block where the only person who noticed something was wrong was a church friend who saw an empty chair on a Sunday morning live stream. The financial lens doesn't change the facts of the timeline. It simply changes what that timeline might mean. The absence of a goodnight call from a daughter who had just had dinner with her mother looks different when that daughter had reportedly been denied money days or weeks earlier. It stops looking like forgetfulness and starts looking like distance. The kind of distance that can exist between two people after a difficult conversation that was never resolved, or the kind of distance that serves a different purpose entirely. But here is where this week added something new to that picture, and this is the part I mentioned at the top. Pima County Sheriff's Department Sergeant Aaron Cross sat down with reporter Brian Entin, and what he said directly contradicts what the family has stated publicly. Savannah Guthrie told Hoda Kotb in March that Annie and Tommaso were clear from the very beginning that Nancy had not simply wandered away. Savannah said, "From the early moments, Annie and Tommy were saying, 'This isn't the case you're used to where someone wanders off. She can't wander off.'" She described her mother as someone barely able to make it to her own mailbox. Sergeant Cross told Brian Entin something different. He said, "That's not the information that I gathered today. What I heard was that the family believed she was out there, that she had walked away." One of those statements is not accurate. Either Annie and Tommaso told investigators from the beginning that Nancy could not have left on her own, or they told investigators the opposite. And if they communicated to law enforcement in those first hours that Nancy might have wandered off, that framing matters enormously. A scene processed as a voluntary disappearance in its first hours is handled completely differently from a scene treated as an active abduction. Evidence that needed to be preserved with urgency might not have been. The clock on the critical window might have been allowed to run longer than it should have. Which brings us back to what FBI Director Kash Patel said this week on a podcast with Sean Hannity, and I want you to hear this in full context because it connects directly to everything we've just been discussing. Patel said, "The first 48 hours in anyone's disappearance are the most critical, and for 4 days, we were kept out of the investigation. 4 days. The FBI, with its resources, its labs, its network of agents, was kept out of this investigation for 4 full days. And Patel didn't stop there. He said that when the FBI was finally brought in, it went directly to Google and recovered the doorbell camera images of the suspect. "That's why you have that image," he said, "because the FBI worked with Google to put that image out. We could have gotten it days before." He also said the FBI had a fixed-wing aircraft sitting on the ground, ready to fly the DNA samples to the lab at Quantico overnight. The sheriff's department sent the DNA to a private lab in Florida instead. And that Florida lab, according to the sheriff's own public statements, later reported challenges analyzing the mixed samples. A plane on the ground, the best forensic lab in the world standing by, and the DNA went to Florida, where it hit challenges, while the FBI was kept out for 4 days. While, according to Sergeant Cross, investigators may have initially been told the family believed Nancy had wandered off. You can look at any single one of those facts and find a reasonable explanation for it. Jurisdictional protocol, operational decisions made under pressure, communication problems in the chaos of those first hours. The sheriff put out a statement pushing back on Patel's account, saying a member of the FBI task force was present from the start and that coordination began without delay. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche stepped in to downplay the conflict publicly, saying the FBI is in complete cooperative mode with local authorities. But note what Blanche also said. "We don't like interagency squabbles. Nobody likes that." That doesn't help the investigation. When the second highest official at the Department of Justice has to say out loud that interagency disputes don't help an active kidnapping case, that is a confirmation, not a denial. Now let's talk about the 911 call, because this is one of the parts where the investigation speaks loudest by what it refuses to release. The call that reported Nancy missing has never been made public. Not the audio, not a transcript, not even a summary. In Arizona, 911 recordings are public records, and in most high-profile missing person cases, they surface within days or even hours. 3 months in, nobody outside the investigation has heard what Annie said when she called to report her mother gone. Retired Detective Bob Gilliam, on Chris McDonough's interview room, addressed this directly. He said there is probably investigative information on that recording that detectives do not want the public to hear yet. He told viewers not to hold their breath waiting for it. And then he said something that carries real weight. He suggested the call might not surface until a trial date approaches. A trial. That single word implies charges. It implies an arrest. It implies that despite 3 months of public silence, this case is moving toward a courtroom, and the 911 call is being held as evidence for that proceeding. Think about what might be on that recording that would justify keeping it sealed. Annie's voice, the time of the call, the exact words she chose, but also the less obvious things. How much detail did she volunteer before the dispatcher even asked? Did she describe what she found inside the house? Did she mention the blood? Did she mention the open doors? Did she say anything that a person arriving at the scene for the very first time would not yet know? There's also that 7-minute gap in the published timeline. The family arrived at Nancy's house at 11:56 a.m. The 911 call was placed at 12:03 p.m. 7 minutes between walking up to the home of a missing 84-year-old woman and picking up the phone. If they saw blood on the front porch within the first minute, and it was in a spot hard to miss, then 6 minutes passed between seeing evidence of a possible crime and reporting it. What were they doing in those 6 minutes? Searching the house? Calling each other? discussing what to say. The 911 recording likely captured background noise, other voices, the caller's emotional state, and all of it is locked away because investigators decided the public cannot hear it yet. And it's worth noting, a trial for a stranger abduction would also require holding that recording. If the FBI profilers are right, if this is a stalker who targeted Nancy because of Savannah, then the 911 call is still evidence in a future prosecution, just against a different kind of defendant. The seal on that recording doesn't point to who is guilty. It points to the fact that someone is going to be prosecuted for what happened to Nancy Guthrie. There is still an open debate among experts about how many people were physically involved in removing Nancy from the house. Detective Gilliam believes it took at least 2 people, given the logistics of moving someone with limited mobility silently through the home, past the security gate, and into a vehicle at 2 in the morning. Former FBI agent Jim Clement looked at the blood pattern on the front steps and thinks a single suspect is more likely because a second person might have prevented Nancy from ending up on the ground outside. C.C. Moore's DNA assessment, Nancy plus 2 or more unknowns, may eventually answer that question. Either way, the answer is sitting in a laboratory right now. A laboratory that, according to Kash Patel, was not the laboratory best equipped to answer that question quickly. Along the way, some leads have closed. A pair of black gloves found about 2 miles from Nancy's home appeared to match the ones worn by the masked suspect on the doorbell camera. The DNA came back, but it led to a local restaurant worker with no connection to the case. Dead end. The Ozark Trail backpack, an $11 Walmart item that the sheriff called one of the most promising leads in the case, generated Walmart purchase records and surveillance footage reviews, and still no arrest. A California man named Derek Kalela was arrested for sending fake ransom texts to Annie and Tommaso, pretending to be the kidnapper and demanding Bitcoin. He was charged and processed quickly, a separate closed thread that had nothing to do with whoever actually took Nancy. And then, this past Thursday, a true crime streamer running a YouTube channel called AJW News found a human bone near the intersection of North Craycroft Road and East River Road, about 7 miles from Nancy's home. The news spread within minutes. Tucson police responded, brought in the University of Arizona's anthropology department and the Pima County medical examiner. The answer came quickly: prehistoric, not connected. The bone was ancient, classified as an anthropological find, not a criminal one. But let that land for a moment. A YouTube streamer, combing the desert outside Tucson, came closer to finding human remains than months of organized searching. That is the state of this investigation right now. More than 30,000 tips received by the FBI. Not one arrest. Where the investigation stands today is telling in its silence. Sheriff Nanos appeared in a short clip on May 1st, saying he believes someone out there knows what happened and urging people to call. That's the statement of a department that is either still gathering pieces or sitting on something it cannot disclose yet. But this week he said something more specific to Fox News Digital, that authorities are getting closer. We are closer, he said. He did not say to what. NBC built a special protocol at the Today Show just for this case. If news about Nancy breaks during a live broadcast, Savannah is pulled from the set immediately, and a different anchor handles it. The information is delivered to her privately. That protocol was activated on April 15th. Networks don't create those kinds of procedures for cases they think are going cold. They create them for cases where they expect a major development, an arrest, a body, an identification that could hit the family in real time on national television. Brian Entin has reported that cooperation between the sheriff and the FBI has improved. Yet Pima County Board of Supervisors Vice Chair Dr. Matthew Hines publicly accused Sheriff Nanos of hindering that cooperation because of a personal grudge. A sitting county official said the sheriff let personal feelings interfere with a federal investigation into the abduction of an 84-year-old woman. That accusation has not been retracted. Ed Smart, father of Elizabeth Smart, appeared on News Nation and chose his words very carefully. He said the Guthrie family have supposedly been cleared. Supposedly is a word you use when you respect the official position while leaving the door open to the possibility that it could change. The DNA is at the lab. The hair sample that the initial sheriff's team missed, the one federal agents recovered on a second visit, is undergoing advanced analysis that may involve Astrea Forensics, the same lab that helped convict Long Island serial killer Rex Heuermann. A CODIS search already came back negative, meaning whoever left biological material inside Nancy's home has never been in the criminal justice system. No prior arrests, no convictions, a clean record that rules out career criminals or random drifters. It describes someone living an ordinary life, someone whose name would not set off any alarm bells. Someone who might attend family dinners, drive elderly women home, sign powers of attorney, and ask for loans that get turned down. Or someone who watches a television anchor every morning, who sends letters and emails that never get answered, who eventually decides that if he can't reach the woman he's fixated on, he'll reach the person she loves most. Both of those descriptions fit the evidence. Neither has been eliminated. 3 months, no arrest, no named suspect. A mother who reportedly said no to a loan from her daughter and then disappeared from $1 million home. A daughter whose vehicle was seized and held for 40 days of exhaustive forensic analysis. A son-in-law who controlled the final ride home with no independent verification. A power of attorney signed 8 months earlier. Property being cleared from a home whose owner has not been declared dead. A 911 call sealed by investigators for reasons a retired detective ties directly to a future trial. A sergeant who says investigators were told something in those first hours that contradicts the family's public account. An FBI director who says his agency was kept out for 4 days while a plane sat on the ground waiting to rush DNA to Quantico, DNA from multiple unidentified people with clean records, and an investigation that has gone quiet in exactly the way investigations go quiet when something important is being assembled behind closed doors. Every video before this one showed you how Nancy Guthrie was taken. This one shows you why someone would go through all of it. And the answer, whether it starts with a conversation about money or with an obsession that festered somewhere far from that dinner table, begins with someone who knew exactly how unprotected she was, and exactly how long the window would stay open. Let me stack the entire thread one final time from beginning to end, because when you see it as a single unbroken sequence, the picture is hard to look away from. May 2025, durable power of attorney signed, giving Annie authority over Tommaso's financial and property affairs. Legal experts say it's routine for real estate deals. Sometime before January 31st, Annie reportedly asks Nancy for a loan. Nancy says no. January 11th, between 9 p.m. and midnight, investigators later request neighbor camera footage from this specific date. Someone was near Nancy's home 3 weeks before she disappeared. January 31st, 5:32 p.m. Nancy takes a documented Uber to Annie and Tommaso's for dinner. January 31st, approximately 9:50 p.m. Tommaso drives Nancy home. The ride has no independent verification. 9:50 p.m. to 12:03 p.m. the next day. 14 hours and 13 minutes of total silence. No call, no text, no visit. February 1st, 2:12 a.m. Security software detects a person in front of one of her cameras. Footage initially unrecoverable. February 1st, 2:28 a.m. Nancy's pacemaker disconnects from her phone. She has been moved beyond Bluetooth range. February 1st, 12:03 p.m. Annie places the 911 call, 7 minutes after the family arrives at Nancy's house. The recording is currently sealed by investigators. Early February, the FBI, after being brought in 4 days late according to Director Patel, works with Google to recover doorbell footage. The suspect, male, 5'9" to 5'10", average build, ski mask, gloves, holstered pistol, Ozark Trail backpack. Gloves found 2 miles from the scene are traced to a restaurant worker. Dead end. February through March, Annie's Honda CR-V is seized and held for over 40 days of forensic examination. DNA from the scene returns no CODIS match. The Florida lab reports challenges. April, photographs surface showing items being removed from Nancy's house while Annie's vehicle is present. No probate has been opened. May 5th, FBI Director Kash Patel publicly states the FBI was kept out for 4 days. Says the DNA should have gone to Quantico. The sheriff pushes back. The acting attorney general tries to contain the damage. May 7th, a true crime streamer finds a human bone 7 miles from Nancy's home. Prehistoric, unrelated, case still open. May 8th, Sergeant Cross tells Brian Entin that the information he gathered was that the family believed Nancy had wandered off, directly contradicting Savannah's public account. May 9th, Sheriff Nano says they are closer. No suspect named, no arrest made. 100 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. That is the thread. It runs through every phase of this case. Each individual item still has an innocent explanation. A power of attorney can be routine, a dinner can be just dinner, a ride home can be a courtesy, a gap in calls can be an oversight, boxes can be moved for safekeeping, a sergeant can be misremembering a stressful conversation, a DNA lab can hit legitimate technical challenges, an FBI director can be overstating his agency's role for political reasons. I have acknowledged all of that, and I acknowledge it again now. But here is what 100 days of covering this case has taught me. When every innocent explanation requires you to ignore the piece that came before it and the piece that comes after it, when you have to pretend the entire sequence doesn't exist just to accept each part in isolation, then the innocent explanations become the ones you have to work hardest to believe. I am not accusing Annie Guthrie or Tommaso Cioni of anything. I have never made that accusation on this channel, and I am not making it now. What I have done in every video since the very first one is follow the publicly available evidence, and right now that evidence has led us down a documented trail, financial, investigative, institutional, that raises more questions than it answers. Questions about a conversation that may have ended with a mother saying no. Questions about 4 days when the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world was standing outside the door. Questions about what a sergeant was told in those first hours that the public was told something different about. And questions about what is on a 911 recording that a retired detective says won't be released until a trial date is set. The answer may be sitting in all of those places at once. And when it finally comes out, and it will come out, the thread we've been following will either have pointed straight at it, or it will have revealed exactly how well the truth was buried underneath things that all had innocent explanations, one at a time. Thank you for watching all the way through. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below. Given everything that broke this week, the FBI director's statement, the sergeant's contradiction, the profiler's theory, which unanswered question do you think is closest to being answered? A retired detective believes the 911 call won't be released until a trial date is set. If you have any information about Nancy's disappearance, please contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward is now over $1.2 million. Nancy deserves answers. Her family deserves answers. And the truth deserves to come out. Stay safe out there, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.